Well, good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday and welcome to tonight's Be Curious LATES event, Imagining Sustainable Futures. My name is Simon Moore and I'll be your host for the next hour or so. I'm a communications officer at the university, working across a few different climate projects. That includes the Leeds Climate Commission and the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission. I've also just started at a community group, Our Future Leeds, working a couple of days a week as part of a national lottery funded program called Climate Action Leeds. I'm also a bit of a climate podcaster as well, and you can check out one of the ones I've most recently been working on called the Pecan Podcast, which I think is going to be shared in the chat for you. So thanks so much for joining us today. I think to start with, it'd be nice to hear where everyone's watching and tuning in from. So do say hello in the chat, which I believe is this side of me on my left. I live in Leeds, but I'm actually staying with family in Bournemouth right now, sort of working holiday away from home. So yeah, who can beat that? Who's further away than Bournemouth to Leeds, which is where we're focusing on. So tonight's event is part of Be Curious, which is the University of Leeds' annual research showcase event. So over this fortnight of events, we're kind of inviting people in for a sneak peek, looking under the bonnet at what goes on inside a university. We've got events and activities for 2 weeks, right up until this Friday. So be sure to check out the rest of the program after this evening's event. We've got hands-on activities for families after school each day at 4 o'clock, and plenty more lates for adults to enjoy at 8 o'clock each night, like tonight. So on to today's program. We're going to be hearing about a variety of attempts to combat waste, from fashion to buildings and food. We've got a wonderful lineup of 3 researchers. That's Dr. Mark Sumner from the University of Leeds, Professor Tristan Watson, a guest joining us from the University of Swansea, and Dr. Gulbanu Kaptan, who is also from Leeds. Each of our speakers has got around 10 minutes to wow you and inspire you with their research. No pressure. They're not here with me. But after each talk, we'll be taking questions from all of you in our lovely audience. So when you think of a question, just post it in the chat. And you'll see that if you're viewing on YouTube. If you're not watching yet on YouTube itself, we'd recommend clicking that option to view the event on YouTube. So then you can interact with us and have the best possible time. So we've got some lovely moderators, Erica and Francis, who'll be keeping an eye on the chat tonight. So do say a big hello to us if you haven't already. So I think it's time to get on with the show. So first up, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Mark Sumner. He's from the School of Design here at the University of Leeds. So if you could all give a very warm welcome to Mark. Here he comes. You might not hear it from all of you, but you know he'll feel the love. Okay, Mark, thanks very much for being here, and the floor is yours. I'll leave you to present.
Thanks very much, Simon, and thank you very much to the Be Curious team for the opportunity to talk with the outside world. It's always great to engage with real people outside the university to talk about some of our research. And I'm going to be talking today about fashion. Now, I'm not a fashionista by any stretch of the imagination, but fashion is a really important part of today's society and today's culture. Fashion is worth something like $1.5 trillion of trade each year globally, employs over 300 million people across the globe. And importantly, for today's focus around waste, West Yorkshire has had a really, really strong position in terms of dealing with fashion waste for several hundreds of years. And I'll potentially come back and talk about that in a while. But before I do that, I think it's really important just to highlight why fashion is important to us as individuals and as a society, to really understand what we mean by fashion waste. And fashion is important because it's not just about clothing that keeps us warm or protects us in terms of modesty. Fashion is far more important than that. It's the most powerful non-verbal communication device that we have as human beings. We say a huge amount of things about ourselves through the clothes that we wear. And actually, we know from doing the research on psychology, we know that fashion is really important in terms of creating our self-identity. It's really important in terms of building our self-confidence. And in many ways, it identifies us and positions us in society. If we wear certain clothes, then people think that we have a certain position within society or within certain groups. And these are the reasons why fashion is important, has been important for thousands of years for culture and our societies. But what we've seen with the growing population and what we've seen in terms of changing shopping behaviour, not just shopping behaviour for fashion, by the way, but general shopping behaviour in modern society, is we're seeing that there's been a significant increase in the consumption of materials, and of course a significant increase in consumption around fashion and the impacts that that has worldwide and here in the UK. And of course, those great increases in consumption create masses of waste. And when we're thinking about clothing waste in particular, we're looking at something like 92 million tons of clothing waste is generated each year around the world. And we can see that the UK also has a big footprint in terms of clothing waste. And that waste actually appears in two forms. We can talk about virtual waste and also real clothing waste. So what I mean by virtual waste is, I'm sure if you all went into your wardrobes and into your cupboards and into your drawers, you would see piles and piles of clothing that you potentially haven't worn for 6 months, a year, maybe even 5 years. And recent research has actually shown there's something like 30 to 40 billion pounds worth of clothing waste sitting in our wardrobes at home and doing nothing, adding no value, just sitting there doing nothing at all. So that's the virtual waste that's associated with the fashion industry. This idea that we have all of this waste sitting in this cupboard somewhere around the UK that isn't being used at all. And while it's not being used, we're going out and buying more clothes, creating even more waste, creating even more challenges for the planet in terms of the impacts that the industry has across that very diverse supply chain. And in terms of real waste, what we can then start to understand is that once we actually manage to get people to dispose of those garments, get them out of the wardrobe and do something with them, we find out that real waste can actually end up in 3 different types of areas and can be disposed of in 3 different ways. There's a really important route for disposing of clothing, and that is through donation to charities, or donating to other members of our families or to friends as hand-me-downs. Donations to charity is really important in terms of the great work that charities do, because they can use clothing donations to drive revenue. They can actually sell that clothing either as clothing or get it recycled and sell it as raw material for other aspects. And what's really interesting about clothing that's donated to charities is that up to 70% of all the clothing that actually is donated to charity does get reused as clothing. So when we're talking about how we can minimize waste and what we can do as individuals, it's really interesting to see that we can actually have a very significant impact by looking at how we can interact with local charities. The other route for clothing, in terms of what we do with it when we decide to throw it out the wardrobe, is selling that clothing. And that's become more and more popular nowadays in terms of using platforms such as peer-to-peer selling through eBay. But we're seeing very specialized clothing sale routes through things like Depop and Vented, for example. And of course, there's lots of other platforms that you can look at in terms of selling your clothing. But the big issue that remains is not all clothing ends up going to charity, or all clothing ends up being sold for reuse. Up to 350,000 tons of textile clothing waste is created in the UK every year. And that is the real waste problem that we're facing in terms of fashion. What's really interesting about that waste that's going into landfill is that in the UK, we have one of the most efficient and effective recycling and reuse schemes in Europe. We are able to recycle and reuse more clothing than many other countries in the UK if we can stop consumers putting their clothing into that black bin and it ending up going into landfill. So when we're thinking about how we can minimize our waste, we can be thinking about avoiding putting clothing into the bin. Very simple things, a very simple approach. But actually, avoiding textile waste and clothing waste, we can look at other aspects of how we all interact with fashion. And this is all about making sure that we can still engage in fashion, because fashion, as I say, is really important, but actually how we engage with fashion in a better way. So what we can be doing to reduce our fashion waste is buying better, caring for our garments better, and throwing away better. So in terms of buying better, what we need to be thinking about is how we actually buy products that are going to last longer, they're better quality, and they're made of better materials. And what's really interesting by the research that we've been doing more recently, looking at fast fashion, is actually fast fashion in many cases outperforms designer labels and luxury brands in terms of the quality and durability of those garments. We recently did a piece of research where we showed that a £12 pair of jeans can last 2.5 times longer than a pair of jeans that cost £160. So buying better isn't always about buying the most expensive or avoiding the cheapest product. It's about being careful about your purchases and identifying those products that actually are going to last longer. The other thing that we know has a very significant impact in terms of reducing waste, but also has a really good impact in terms of reducing the environmental impact of our behaviours around fashion, is caring for our garments better. And this perversely means not washing our garments more, but washing our garments less. Every time we wash our garments, we're reducing the lifetime that garment has. We're increasing the fading that happens on that garment. We're increasing the likelihood of shrinkage, and we're also increasing pilling and general damage to that garment. And if we can get our garments to last 9 months longer than they currently do, we can actually reduce CO2 by 8% and water usage by 10%. And furthermore, if we reduce the washing temperatures that we use in our washing machines and don't tumble dry, we can make significant savings in terms of waste, but also reduce water and energy costs. And in fact, recent research has shown that we have made a reduction of 700,000 tons of CO2 by reducing the amount of washing and the amount of tumble drying that we do. And in terms of throwing away better, this is going back to this idea of working out what we do with clothing when it comes to end of life. Don't use the black bin bag. Don't throw your garments into the bin. What you should be doing with those is thinking about donating the good quality garments to charity or selling them via peer-to-peer websites. And if they're poor quality, put them into a textile recycling bank. Because what will happen to those garments is they'll be broken down and turned into materials that we can use for mattresses, can be used for insulation, and potentially in the future may be used for new clothing. So really what we're saying here is fashion is really important, and we shouldn't be stopping ourselves from engaging in fashion because it says an awful lot about us. But what we should be doing is thinking about how we can do fashion better. And we need to do fashion better because it's better for us in terms of our self-esteem, but it's also better for the planet as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I think we've now got time for some questions.
That's excellent. Thanks, Mark. Right on your buzzer. So thanks for the great timing as well. Yeah, we've got lots of questions here, and thanks everyone for your comments and hellos so far. I mean, fashion, like you said at the start, is sort of a universal kind of trait really of humans. So it's great that we've got people watching from West Africa, as close as South Leeds, Harrogate, Colombia, Turkey, and even Barnsley. So thanks everyone for watching and for all these great questions. So we'll try and get through as many as we can. So first up was Olwen, who asks, when you use the word fashion, do you mean clothes or do you mean sort of anything more than that?
So when I talk about fashion, it really is talking about all the clothing that we wear, whether we consider it to be fashionable or not. It's about the clothes that we wear. And the reason we talk about fashion a lot is because it really is an important part of, our sort of makeup. Although we may not think about these as conscious decisions, we're always thinking about what type of clothing we're buying because it's saying something about us. It's no longer just about doing a job. in terms of keeping us warm, for example. So yes, so we're talking about clothing, and that also includes things like footwear, accessories, handbags, etc. So all of these things are part of that process.
And there's another one here from George, who I believe is from Colombia, actually, and it is quite a nice link to the next talk for this evening, which is, can recycled clothes be used for insulation in construction?
Absolutely, they can. But what we're trying to get everyone to be thinking about is because clothing don't get fully utilised. And what I mean by that is often when we finish with our clothing, it's not because it's come to the end of its functional life. It's generally come to the end of the life that we want to have with it. So it's no longer fashionable, it no longer fits us, or we just want to have a change. So what we try to avoid is breaking down that garment into its original fibres for recycling. We want to keep that garment and give it a second life if we can. Now, ultimately, it will come to the point where that garment is no longer suitable as a garment. And what we can do with textile waste is break it down into its component fibres, and those fibres can be used for all sorts of things like thermal insulation, acoustic insulation. It's used in the automotive industry for those types of insulation. It can also potentially be used as a binder within sort of concrete structures, for example. Now that's quite specialised in terms of some of the textile waste that can be used. But absolutely, this is part of the area that we're really focusing on. With 350,000 tonnes of textile clothing waste every year, we want to be thinking about how we can use waste in a different way. The construction industry is a great opportunity for that's been exploited already.
That's remarkable. I think it's well done to our organisers who managed to link two topics that, at the face of it aren't incredibly kind of close together. We've got another one. We've got a couple of people asking about, so there's a question here from Isaac. Can you share some of the best quality brands? And there's a related one about sort of top tips for consumers to find the garments that are most sustainable.
I'd love to answer that question, and it's a question I get asked all the time. Which of the brands to focus on, and I think within my academic position, I'm not really allowed to promote brands. But what I would say is, although we're talking about waste today, fashion has a very significant environmental impact and social impact. So it's not just about identifying good quality, durable garments. What I would say in terms of identifying brands that you want to engage in is thinking about the overall sustainability of those brands, not just the durability of garments. And do a bit of research on those brands. There are many interesting brands who normally are considered to be, fast fashion brands, and they're not doing anything good. But actually, there are some really interesting brands doing some extraordinary things around improving the livelihoods of cotton farmers in places like East and West Africa and in Pakistan and India. They're doing some really interesting things in terms of the processing to reduce chemical use, to use water and carbon emissions. So if you go look on their websites, you can actually start to see some of the work that they're doing. And if you have a brand that you're really interested in and they're not talking about this, I really do encourage everyone to write a letter to the chief executive. Make sure it's for the chief exec, because it will go to them ultimately, and ask them why aren't they doing anything about the environmental and social impacts associated with fashion. And I'd also suggest look at those brands that are doing take-back schemes. So this is this opportunity where brands will say to consumers, bring your garments back and we'll do something useful with them. So you get some insights into the brands to go for by just doing a little bit of research online to see what they're doing.
Great, and I think we'll just take a final question here that's from Blossom. Thank you for this one. So Blossom is kind of asking about how do we keep up? Fashion's often constantly changing, and there's new trends. So how do we kind of deal with that from a sustainability perspective?
And that, Blossom, is a really interesting and very challenging question. What we see and what we know in terms of human behaviour, not just now in terms of this social media sort of environment what we have, but over thousands of years, engagement in fashion and how we project ourselves is really important. Fashion, as I say, is the most powerful non-verbal communication device. So trying to balance up the needs of consumers in terms of fashion and what it does for us in terms of well-being, but also balancing that up in terms of trying not to have this constant feed of change in fashion is really difficult. And ultimately, as we talk now, there isn't a solution that works for both sides. But what people are trying to do is trying to work out how we can help consumers engage with fashion by personalizing that fashion so it stays with that person for longer. And looking at customization, for example, and looking also at how we can actually minimize the impact of production of fashion in the long term. But it is important to remember that people tend to focus on the bad points of fashion in terms of its environmental impact and waste. It is important to remember it's $1.5 trillion of trade, and there are 300 million people employed in fashion. Most of those people are in developing nations, and most of those people are engaging in fashion and that clothing industry because they want to use it to get out of poverty, which is a really important part of what fashion's doing. So it is a big challenge. So I'm really glad that Blossom's asked that question, but I'm also a little bit disappointed that we don't have a solution to that particular question at this moment.
Just one final thing I'll just add in myself. I think you mentioned kind of virtual fashion. I think it's something I've seen recently as this sort of digital garments that you can buy and sort of own the digital product rather than a real product. Is that something that sort of excites you, or you think we might see a lot more of? Could that be one of the sort of solutions?
It potentially is a solution, because what we are seeing in terms of pre-COVID, what we're seeing is people were buying, particularly from online brands, buying clothing, putting it on, doing their Instagram photo or doing their social media sort of work, and then putting it back in the bag and sending it back to the brand. And at certain times of the year, for every 6 garments that are bought online, 5 will go back to the store, which is crazy. So in some sense, that virtual fashion has a very interesting, almost immediate effect that people can actually start thinking about how they can do that. More importantly, for the long term, though, we think that this idea of virtual fashion is going to be really important in terms of how people actually physically will buy physical garments, that they can look at themselves in the garment at home, in different backgrounds, in different designs and different styles. So when ultimately they actually buy that garment will be perfect for them. And we know that that means that they will keep that garment and use it for longer. So the immediate effect, I think, is interesting. The longer term impact of that could be really, really interesting for the fashion industry.
That's excellent. Well, thank you again, Mark. That's been really, really excellent. And yeah, thanks for the talk, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, well, normally we'd have a bit of a break here. We'd all go to the bar, grab a drink, but I'm afraid there's no bar this evening. There's no one to bump into at the bar. So it's straight on to our second speaker for the evening. So Professor Tristan Watson is a very special guest, as he's from the University of Swansea. So over to you, Tristan. Again, we'll have a nice warm round of applause. Welcome you in. Thanks very much. And again, to everyone who's watching, thanks for your questions. Keep them coming, and we'll be asking Tristan next after his talk. Over to you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation to come and speak at the Be Curious event. It really is a privilege to have the opportunity to chat about some of the things that we love. And talking about some of the things that we love, I'm a technology enthusiast, and I really like to follow the new developments that are going on in the world. I like to think of developments in VR and AI as critically important to the future. I'm fascinated by the new space race that's going on. I'm excited. I'm kept up at night thinking about the evolution in semiconductor design. And of course, I'm old enough now in Wales to have been double jabbed. So all of this excellent technology that's gone into the development of the COVID vaccine has been enormously exciting for me. But nothing excites me more than this. This, for me, is the game changer technology that could solve the world's energy crisis. This here is the answer to climate change. I like to call this a building. This is a building, and there are about 4 billion square meters of surface on buildings around the UK. And it does one thing really, really well, and that is it keeps the wind and the rain out. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything else typically. And that, prepare for the tenuous link, is a absolute waste. And so what I'm going to talk about today is how do we take this technological marvel that is a building and do a lot more with it in order to have an influence on sustainability and to reduce the waste that is effectively at the 4 billion square meter mark. Now, this is a diagram that effectively shows the amount of energy that's used per day over time. The only message that I want you to take away from this is that in terms of gas consumption, which is the blue line, 40% of it is used by buildings. So 40% of this huge energy drain is used by buildings. So imagine that we were able to do something about that. Imagine we were able to reduce that demand via other means. We could really have an impact. So what we set out to do is to look at how we might generate, store, and release energy using the fabric of the building. So this is not designed to take up space where you might be sat watching a Be Curious event on your sofa. This is designed to be inobtrusive. It's designed to use the skin of the building. Can we develop buildings that are power stations? Now, when it comes to using the energy, of course, we can look down and we can get energy from looking down, and we can get it from coal or oil or gas, or we can do something a little bit more effective when it comes to mitigating climate change, and that is that we could look up. And this is the answer, I think, to the question of where do we get the energy from to power our buildings? Because in reality, every day more solar energy falls on the earth than humanity will use in the next 27 years. So even though my children get scared by the fact that in billions of years the sun will eventually go dark, and I keep telling them they probably won't be around then, probably, the reality is it is going to be there for some time, and we don't use it. We don't use this massive resource in energy. So how can we use the sun's energy to power a building? And I'm not talking about providing some casual electricity every now and again. I'm talking about providing its full needs. And I'm not talking about it in a sunny climate. I'm talking about it in the UK. So how can we use the sun to power a building completely in the UK that might mitigate the 40% of energy that's used via gas? Well, we can use photovoltaics, and photovoltaics are solar panels that use the sun's electricity, and it strikes a p-n junction, which causes an excited electron, and we can take that into an external circuit, and that can power our devices. Fantastic opportunity to use PV on a building, and you can make PV rigid, which is the typical PV that you might see around, which is silicon, or you can use the example in this picture here, the top left picture, which is a copper, indium, gallium, selenium flexible device, which you can wrap around the curvature of the building. Incidentally, this particular example on our active buildings, which I'll come on to in a second, is part of the roofing structure. So we're not talking about retrofitting a solar panel once we've decided or we've saved up some money to buy it. We're talking about buying the roof with the solar panel already installed onto it. And then all you do is put the roof up and plug it in. The second one on the top right there is solar thermal. So when a solar cell absorbs electricity, when it absorbs light and generates electricity, it often gets hot, and you can do something with that. So this is a company called Naked Energy who make these solar thermal devices, which you can use to create heat as well as electricity. The bottom right then is a technology that uses the difference in heat in order to generate electricity, and we call that a thermoelectric. These don't need to be facing the sun. They don't need to see the light. They just need to see the heat. So these can be embedded underneath the solar cells. Again, an opportunity to do more with that space. The bottom left-hand corner is really exciting because that is steel with holes. It's called a transpired solar collector. And what it does is that the coating on the steel gets a little bit warm when the sun's rays are on it. It doesn't need to be a warm day. It just needs to have sunlight incident on it. That will get really warm, and the holes that exist within that steel sheeting are allowed to draw in that little boundary layer of hot air that's warmed up by that coating. All it is steel with holes put onto the side of a building, and you can get an uplift of 10 degrees sometimes or more. And that's it. So these technologies exist, and they need to be put together and put to work. We need to store that electricity as well, which is critically important. And we can use that via electrochemical means. So we can use batteries that might have lithium in them, that might have sodium in them. And through an electrochemical reaction, they can store that electricity for a long period of time. We don't need to use the same sort of technology that exists in phones. We actually need something that lasts 20 or 30 years, but it doesn't need to come on straight away. It doesn't need to be able to power the same sort of power distribution that's required for a phone. So different technologies for buildings that are different technologies for cars that are different technologies for phones. This one on the right of your screen, this is really exciting. Imagine that you could take the energy from the summer, the heat from the summer, lock it away, and then bring it out in the winter. Well, that technology also exists, and that's thermochemical storage. Through a chemical reaction, you can lock in hot air that's pumped over a salt-in matrix type material, and you can lock it away, and then you can bring it out in the winter time when you need that hot air. And we have buildings in Swansea that have been powered or they've been heated using this technology for a few years. And it is a technology that exists and needs to be developed. The other challenge that we have is getting them to talk to each other. So a lot of these technologies exist in isolation, and occasionally somebody will use one or two. Maybe they'll have a PV with a battery, but they may not have a PV with thermochemical storage, with electrochemical storage, with solar thermal. So what we have is a system where we get them to talk to each other. So one of the things that we really explored is how to get these brilliant technologies to talk to each other, because we need to learn how to turn the heating off if the electricity is on or the sun is shining on the PV and the batteries are full. What do we do with the excess electricity? All of these various things require this sort of technological communication between these items. But to prove that we could do it, we actually built a building. And we showed that in the space of 6 weeks, not me, I should say, because I'm rather calamitous with a hammer, some far more professional individuals at Specific put together this building within 6 months. Hopefully you can see it. There we are. That may be the video that you need to see. And we were able to put this together in the space of a few weeks to actually create an active classroom. So this then acts as a prototype building, and we teach students in there, and we're actually able to use it regularly. The next thing that we do is we measure what goes on in those buildings to try and understand whether the people that occupy those buildings actually like it or not. Are they comfortable with the way in which the electricity or the heating is distributed in the building? Because if you want to make something work, people have to want it, and people must not be, and occupants of the building must not be disadvantaged. They must feel as if there's nothing. The best active building, as far as we're concerned, is the one that's most inobtrusive. It's nice to see the technology at work, but in reality, you don't want it to have that impact. There's so many exciting things that you can do with a building that generates, stores, and uses its own electricity. Final few slides. We actually went further than the active classroom and built an active office, which we currently occupy, and people use that building every day, or when they're allowed back, we'll use that building every day. And so it's really exciting. I wanted to just finish with a few slides that really illustrate this technology evolution. So the idea of making a building to use the sun's energy is nothing new. The Puebloan people in 1200 BC were doing it by building their homes facing southward to take advantage of the warm winter sun. And what's really great about renewable technologies, say like solar cells, is they've also endured a technology evolution. So for example, solar cells, and when I talk about solar cells on buildings, they were on boats back in the 1950s, and this chap here no doubt has a few cans underneath that solar cell, so he's off on a nice day out. But skip forward 60, 70 years, and we've got a boat that's entirely powered by PV. When we think about cars, 1912, they were solar powered. But in fact, if we skip forward over 100 years, they're entirely solar powered, and you can actually go in these really long races using solar powered. Not for people of my weight or BMI, I might add, but certainly some people can be carried by these cars. Airplanes have progressed now from the 1981 DuPont Gossamer right forward to the Solar Impulse in 2015. And the point of this really is to show where active buildings really came from as a final few slides. And that is in 1883. When Charles Fritz actually created the world's first building-applied PV, which was a solar array that he put on the top of his building in 1883. Now, skip forward over 100 years, and we're really trying to fight the good fight when it comes to pushing these technologies and using this wasted space that exists on a building. I want to leave you with a thought by one of the world's greatest inventors, Thomas Edison. And he said, "I'd put my money on solar energy. I hope we don't have to wait until the oil and coal run out before we tackle that." And I think that was said in 1931. And what we're trying to do with active buildings is to live that and ensure that over the next few years, we push and push and push until those 4 billion square meters are doing a lot more than keeping the wind and the rain out. Thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Tristan. That was brilliant. We've got plenty of questions, so let's jump straight in. Amber's asked a couple. So she starts by asking about whether an increase in solar technologies is going to require tons of chemicals and rare elements. So what's the trade-off there? And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in fact, the main focus of my job is looking at new types of solar technologies. And one of the things that you have to do when you're developing these technologies is ensure that you're not just swapping a really rare element for another rare element. So even in the technology development phase of new PV technologies, we're already looking at what are the mineable quantities, making sure that it's not a byproduct of another material that doesn't need to be mined. One of the big materials in solar cells at the moment is indium, which is a byproduct of zinc mining. But actually we need it for our smartphones. So actually we try to engineer out these issues, and we try to go for materials that are not resource constrained, as we might say. Very good question though, and really important.
I think her other question is great as well, about whether it's more efficient using things like wind energy on houses, especially near the coast.
Yeah, I think the problem with wind is that it needs to be significant in size in order to be, efficient. Certainly, I'm not a supporter of single sources of renewable energy. I think the best thing that we can see in the future is a mix. So it might be that if you're by the coast, it might be that tidal energy is the best choice. So although I work in the area of active buildings, if the best choice is wind or the best choice is tidal, then that's the choice. I think it's the mix is the most important point.
Yeah. Here's one from Isaac. Is it realistic that our future homes and buildings could be powered in such a way? And what's the timeline? I think this comes to the quote you showed at the end that, there's a lot of places around the UK with 2030 net zero targets. So how soon can this actually make an impact?
Well, there's the gap that exists at the moment, or that's being bridged at the moment, is between scientists and construction companies. So they're the people that really have this great opportunity. So I think the technologies do exist. The complexity sometimes is in installing and training people to use these technologies and get them integrated, and to recognize that there's more than just solar cells and there's more than just batteries, that there's a whole range of different technologies that you can apply. But the stakeholders in this are not just the scientists, they're the consumers, they're government policies, they're the construction companies. They've all got a part to play. The reality is there's a lot of wasted space out there that could be used, and new build is the main opportunity for those. We do see it, but there's more that can be done. And the example that we've got on our campus, the active buildings that we've got, they're net zero. They don't require any additional electricity over the course of the year. So even in the UK climate, it's absolutely possible to do it.
Great. And there's a question here from Steph, and it's the question's slightly blowing my mind, but I think that's probably why it's a good one. What about the reverse? How about storing energy for cooling? And obviously the example there is of British Columbia, not too dissimilar to the UK, where they were close to 50 degrees just a week or two ago.
Another terrific question, and one that we thought a lot about, for the reason that we collaborate a lot with groups in India, for example, and they don't need heating. What they actually need is cooling. And so what we need to look at is the way in which the building is used. So there's a really interesting discussion that we had, which relates to the idea that when in the UK, we store our electricity for lighting in the night. But actually in somewhere like India, the electricity is required when in the day, when it's hot and you need to run the air conditioning units, for example. So what that meant was that there was a better use of the PV rather than the batteries, for example. So more space for PV, more money spent on PV, less on batteries. So it does require a complete rethink of how you do it. active technology absolutely is just as suitable for those sorts of climates where you might require air conditioning than you would, but it's a different question of balancing your input, your energy generation versus your energy storage and when you might need it. Typically, you don't need air conditioning so much in the evening than you would in the day. So the storage requirements change a little bit. And you just reassess the building as a whole.
That's excellent. And there's a couple of comments here. You've sent one person, you sent Vix in a sort of positive direction. Vix says, hearing about these technologies makes me feel much more positive about our future prospects on this planet, which I'd agree with. But then we've got another side of the spectrum. We've got Blossom, who's saying it's a hard social, political battle to fight, given that, people are currently using non-renewables, and it feels like we'd have to totally restructure the energy world. So where do we start with this big challenge?
Yeah, again, another good question, but also with lots of different answers. I think one of the things that we'll see over the next few years is the cost paradigm changing. So what we're going to see over the next few years is renewables becoming cheaper, and there's nothing that we like more than to save a bit of money. And what we'll find, I think, is that the ability to derive our electricity from renewables will be much more attractive from a cost basis, because the cost of solar panels, due to the mass manufacturing that goes on in China, for example, will bring that cost right down. The other thing that we've got to do is make sure that we don't, and I mentioned this previously, we don't disadvantage people when we provide technology solutions that use non-renewables. So they mustn't be at a disadvantage. So when we create active buildings, there has to be a net benefit to the people there beyond, say, the fact that they've got green credentials. There needs to be a cheaper way of living. There needs to be no fuel poverty, for example. And that's one thing that active buildings completely removes, is the idea of having to choose between eating and heating, for example. So I get the point by Blossom completely, but I think the case that we can put forward is quite compelling and will only get better as time goes on. I think the costs are only going in one direction for renewables.
And just interesting one here, linking back to Mark's talk that we've just heard. So George asks how solar flex PV will drive the change for clothing or wearables.
Yeah, and I think there's plenty of research ongoing where we can integrate flex into clothing or wearable. I suppose there's got to be a good reason for having flexible solar cells in your clothing rather than it distributed elsewhere, for example. I mean, it reminds me of the idea of having solar cells on a car, for example. Which is a good idea, and it's not a problem. But if the car is often stationary for a lot of the time, so it's better to have the solar cells in a carport in massive areas with the car plugged in. If you really feel that you're going to be away from a source of energy and you need it to be built into your clothing for sensors, that's probably where the opportunities are. So Internet of Things powered by solar technology, I think, is where the market for wearables comes in. So not necessarily, charging up a big battery, but perhaps being able to provide some sort of medical sensor built into your clothing, I think. And that technology for flexible built-in wearables, that's on its way here anyway. And combining that with IoT and sensors, I think, is the real opportunity there, in my opinion.
Wow, again, it's just like, wow, that's sort of the future that I hadn't quite envisaged yet. So it may be coming faster than we think. Just a final question, and I wonder, this might be too good to be true, but we've got a question from Can, who asks, can Nikola Tesla's free electronic circuit be helpful to produce and keep electricity in our homes for free?
Yeah, well, this is one where I'm going to have to resort to using Google at a later time, I'm afraid. So despite my professorial credentials, I'm not sure what that is, I'm afraid. So I've got Thomas Edison's autobiography somewhere half read on my bookshelf, but I'm afraid they're not Nikola Tesla's. So I need to go and resolve that straight away.
No worries. Well, yeah, we look forward to you getting back to us on that. But yeah, I think it's quite nice sometimes to hear professors say, actually, I can't answer that one.
No, my classic answer then is I'll get back to you. Does anybody else here know it? Does anybody else here know the answer? No? I'll get back to you. Next lecture.
Well, thanks so much. I think we have to move to the next lecture indeed. So thanks very much, Tristan. Really appreciate you dropping by. Excellent. Okay. So finally, tonight's final speaker is going to be Dr. Gulbanu Kaptan. Gulbano's from the Leeds University Business School, and it's time now to turn to our attention and talk about food, I believe. So Gulbano, it's over to you.
Thanks, Simon. Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted about the opportunity to be able to talk about one area of my research in Be Curious LATES event. Well, I think you see my slides, don't you? Because I don't see myself.
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So I see myself as an academic and researcher who is passionate to contribute to the efforts aiming to make the world a better place to live in for us and future generations. And in relation to this, one area of my research is on reducing food waste. And the question I'm interested in and trying to answer is how we as consumers can reduce our food waste at home. To answer the question of what we need to do to reduce food waste, the first question to answer is why we need to reduce our food waste. And one answer is to ensure food security for us and future generations. Is it easy to ensure food security? No, it's very challenging, I'm afraid. According to the predictions of the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, global demand for food will increase by 60% by 2050, and this is due to the growth of population. According to the United Nations, with an increasing population that would reach 9.6 billion by 2050, we will need almost 3 planets to sustain our ways of living. Because food supply must use the same or less land and fewer inputs such as water. Therefore, we would need to produce less waste and have a lower environmental impact. There are other challenges such as climate change and demographic changes that we expect to happen and already happening. Therefore, we really need to have environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable food system for all, a food system that provides a safe and nutritious diet with minimum waste. And this is what we call food security. In conclusion, what I'm trying to say, by reducing our food waste now, we can secure our future food system. Let's briefly see the efforts on reducing food waste at both global and UK level. At the global level, there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals put forward by the UN, and these are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. Food waste is included in Goal 12 out of 17, and this is ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. In relation to this, the commitment for 2030 is 50% per person reduction in food and drink waste. At UK level, we have Courthouse Commitment 2025. This is a voluntary agreement between UK organizations to improve resource efficiency and reduce food waste across the UK food system. And the agreement was delivered by Waste Resources Action Programme, the major food waste organization in the UK, WRAP, and this was done in 2015. The commitment for 2025 is 20% per person reduction in food and drink waste. And according to January 2020 figures, there's a 7% reduction in 5 years between 2015 and 2020. And this reduction is referred to successful campaigns of WRAP, such as Love Food, Hate Waste. It's a well-known campaign in the UK. Let's focus on the food waste problem in the UK just before COVID, because I first would like to focus on the issue of food waste before COVID and then after COVID. This figure demonstrates the amounts of total food waste in each sector in the UK: household, retail, manufacture, and hospitality and food services. These were published in January 2020, before the pandemic started. As you see, household food waste has the highest share with 70%, indicating that there is still room for improvement. The problem about household food waste arises from the requirement of behavior change at a large scale. And before explaining you the issue on food waste during lockdown, I would like to show you a few results from my own research indicating UK consumers' behavior regarding food waste and why it is difficult to change behavior. The results are from a study that I conducted before the pandemic. It was in collaboration with colleagues from Leeds University Business School and RAP. And our aim was to identify strategies for promoting better nutrition, improved food safety, and less food waste. For this purpose, we interviewed domain experts from these areas about their experiences with consumers. These were both practitioners and academics. And the results show that consumers intend to buy more fruits and vegetables for health benefits, leading to more food waste. And this is due to poor storage and cooking skills. Actually, we had many results, but I just wanted to include the most interesting and relevant ones to this talk. And I think these three are the relevant ones. For example, consumers generally do not know how to keep fruits and vegetables fresh and longer, or they try to buy them fresh rather than frozen. Another finding was consumer confusion about date labels, that is best before versus use by dates. If food is consumed past its use by date, this may lead to foodborne illness, or if food is thrown away on or around best before date, this may lead more food waste. Difficulty of changing behavior due to competing priorities was revealed as the main barrier, and this is the one I find most important. These competing priorities included, for example, promotions in supermarkets, 3-4-2, leading to buying more than needed and wasting some. Value placed on food was another barrier. The more value people place on food, the less they waste. And based on these findings, the recommendation was to improve consumers' cooking and food storage skills, as well as their understanding of date labels. And this slide was just to give you a flavor of how consumers was dealing with food waste before COVID. Let's see what happened following the pandemic in early 2020. We were faced to something we never had faced to. A tiny virus changed our lives completely. We experienced national lockdowns one after another. We needed to stay at home, work from home, non-essential shops were closed, schools were shut down. And this has been a big contextual change in our lives. Now it has been more than a year, and I think we really feel it deeply, and we know how it is, and we all are fed up. How did this contextual change affected our lives in terms of food waste? This is the main question in this talk. Survey studies conducted during the first national lockdown, which is in around April 2020, showed a positive change in food waste behavior. So people reduced their food waste. For example, UK consumers reported that they reduced their food waste by 34% compared to the average across 2018-2019. And the major reasons of this reduction were having more time to cook, having more time for shopping and planning, and financial burdens during lockdown. While this reduction was promising, previous research shows that behavior change resulting from temporary contextual changes may not last long. Levels of reported food waste indeed began to rebound after the first national lockdown, with an increase of 31% compared to the lockdown figures. However, it still remained below the levels seen pre-lockdown. Therefore, my colleagues from the University of Leeds and RAP and myself came up with the following research question. How can we maintain the positive food waste reduction behaviors after the pandemic over the long term? Because there's a reduction in food waste, which is unexpected, which is great. So how can we maintain this positive behavior change? to reach the Courthouse 2025 targets and also UN sustainability goals. We got official support from RAP and Zero Waste Scotland. These are the two major food waste organizations in the UK. For our project idea, they supported us, and we were able to secure a research grant from the Economic and Social Research Council. Of course, now it is simple. It is so simple to tell, but it was a quite difficult process, and we got it. So this is an 18-month project to maintain the positive food waste reduction behaviors over the long term. This slide shows how we are conducting the project. We first started with a national representative survey in the UK, followed by an interview study with some of the survey participants. The aim of the survey and interviews were to determine the drivers of food waste, particularly during the lockdowns, and understand what behaviors changed and not changed during COVID. I can provide some key findings, concrete findings in a couple of months, but our analysis and comparison of survey results with the interviews still continue. Nevertheless, our findings are in line with some of earlier findings of RAP, showing that during lockdown, some people indeed had more time to cook, and they had more time for planning before shopping. And some of them planned their shopping not to spend more time in the supermarket, not to get infected. Additionally, we found that people's values and goals, they have affect their intentions to reduce food waste. We are about to start phase 2 after we properly finish phase 1. Phase 2 is an intervention study to maintain this positive behavior change in the long term. This is the key phase of the project, as we will implement the findings of phase 1 to develop and evaluate interventions to maintain positive behavior change. And phase 3 is the dissemination, last stage. This is the dissemination of project outcomes across the UK with help from our project partners, RAP and Zero Waste Scotland, through their teams and networks. I would like to thank you very much for your interest. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. If you have any questions or comments in the future, please feel free to email me. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Kilbani. We've got a few questions here, so let's get into them. So Isaac asks, can you offer any personal tips from your experience for reducing our own food waste?
Yeah, one of the main things is frozen food is healthy and safe to eat, so we shouldn't avoid eating frozen food. It is as healthy as fresh food because fresh vegetables are, of course, more prone to deteriorate. And one of the main problems with food waste is you buy fresh vegetables or fruits. It is the same in our home sometimes, particularly if you have children. Then some of them get wasted. So don't be afraid to buy frozen food. And Google search or RAP's website is really helpful to look for how to keep your veg and fruits in the fridge, outside. Some of them should be kept in the fridge, some of them should be kept outside. And where in the fridge you should place them. And one of the major things is planning, which we are not very good at, or some people are not very good at. Before going shopping, please check your cupboards and fridge and see what you need, what you don't need. Because when you go particularly to big supermarkets, it's very attractive and you mostly end up buying more than you need. So one of the main things is we shouldn't buy more than we need. These are the major tips, I think.
That's great. That's great. And Blossom is asking about kind of the practical skills for cooking and also food storage, like you've just said. So what role do you think schools have to play? Not all schools. Some do teach cooking, but not necessarily all of them.
Yeah, it's a debated issue. Not a debated issue, but there's a discussion around it, because I wasn't born in the UK, but senior colleagues, what I heard from senior colleagues, I think there were classes in the past in school about cooking, but now there isn't any. People, particularly the experts, nutritionists as well, and food-based experts, want these classes to start in schools, because school education is, I also believe that I have a daughter in the primary school, and I can see that the things they learn in the school last longer than the things they learn at home. It's easier to grasp in the school environment, I think. So there's a pressure about it.
Yeah. And Vix has got a bit of a suggestion that people in the Yorkshire area can consider getting boxes of rescued food. I think things like the Real Junk Food Project, Rethink Food, Food Revival. Do you think those things are able to make quite a big impact, or what role do you think they have?
Any impact is fine, I think. I also was in a panel with Jamie Cribbing from Too Good To Go. Yeah. This is also one way what they do. So they have an app, so you can get foods which are close to expire date, etc. And yes, Real Junk Food Project, I really appreciate their efforts, and I'm following their efforts, what they do. I think all of them are really important.
I actually went to university at the University of Leeds with Jamie and with Chris, who set up Too Good To Go. Another great example. We've got a question here from George again, who says how food banks are working in a coordinated way to assure food for all, but also decreasing waste.
Well, I am not an expert. I don't have much research on food banks, but because of another project I am conducting for the Food Standards Agency, I have some information. And for example, what I can share with food banks during COVID, the things didn't go well as it did in home, because there's shortage of staff, and the main priority is providing food to those people. So people were asking about safety concerns, etc. But in that sense, but food banks are really important. And one big, I think it's important finding, during the lockdowns, there are much more people who use food banks. Both Food Standards Agency surveys and RAP surveys show the same. And one of the actual reasons why people reduce food waste during lockdown is financial burdens in different ways. Yeah, food banks is really important. Thanks for that question. I somehow didn't include it. Sorry about that.
That's great. Well, no, thanks to everyone who's commented. Given we've got tips in the chat there as well, and thanks for all those questions. I'll just add a final one myself before we wrap up, which is, what are your kind of suspicions about some of the perhaps more positive reasons that people managed to reduce their food waste during COVID, and how hopeful are you that you might be able to encourage that beyond these lockdowns?
Well, our preliminary results show that there are different groups of people. For example, people who already give that more value about food waste, who are concerned about environment, about food, they didn't change their behavior much. The behavior change happened with others who were wasting less, but it's just a preliminary finding, actually. So it needs to be validated. So I think if it is the case, the main focus should be those people, because during lockdown, they developed their cooking skills. Because of the contextual change, they needed to make things differently. And all we need to do is to maintain it, to encourage them, to act in the same way. But of course, it is not easy, we know that, but we will do our best to make it happen.
That's great. Well, it's been fascinating to hear about your research, and good luck. Yeah, we all hope you succeed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gulbanu. Okay, well, that brings the evening to a close. That's all we've got time for. I think we're just over time. Thank you so much again to our excellent speakers, Mark Sumner, Tristan Watson, and Gulbanu Kaptan. It's amazing to sort of hear about all that research, and I'm sure you'll agree. And also that something that sounds quite dull, like waste, can actually be, so interesting and mind-blowing in cases. So thanks for the talks, and thanks for helping look after our planet as well, to all three of them. So finally, just a thanks to our moderators for the evening, Erica and Francis. Thanks to Alexa and to Shawnee, who've done an amazing job organising the fiesta that is Be Curious. And most importantly, thanks to everyone who's watched us, joined us from home, and to everyone that sent in questions. We really hope you've enjoyed tonight's event, and hope you know a bit more about what our researchers are getting up to. If you did enjoy it, let us know. You can tweet us at UniLeadsEngage and use the hashtag BeCurious21. And we'd also really appreciate your feedback on tonight's event. So let us know what you thought. We've got a short evaluation form, which you'll find in the chat at any moment. And don't forget, there's more events this week, and they're all free. So have a look at the rest of the program on our website, leeds.ac.uk/BeCurious. And we'd love to see you again soon. So that's it from us. Have a great rest of your evening. And thanks again for spending the hour with us. Goodbye.